The rain was relentless in London that afternoon, streaking the windows of Paddington Station like endless piano notes tumbling down glass. Edward Harrington stood by the platform, his tweed jacket damp at the shoulders, briefcase in one hand, glancing at the arrivals board. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, wet stone, and roasted coffee. Commuters rushed past, umbrellas colliding, voices echoing, but Edward was focused only on the cargo train waiting on track 9. Inside one of the rearmost cars was Sovereign Blue, a living legend in the world of English thoroughbreds, now retired. Edward, once celebrated for patching up million-pound racehorses, had crossed a strange line in his life, from high-flying veterinary surgeon to the nervous steward of a small conservation trust for endangered bloodlines in the Oxfordshire countryside. And today, the heart of his new mission thudded anxiously behind a sliding metal door. The horse, newly acquired after a silent bidding war, was a bundle of nerves. Through a tiny window, Edward could see Sovereign's muscular body trembling. The platform's digital announcements blared overhead, departure times, delays, an endless chorus. Every shriek of the loudspeaker made the horse flinch, eyes wild. The groom who had accompanied Sovereign looked pale, sweat beading at his brow. "Sir, she's at her limit," the groom whispered, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "She nearly went over at Reading." "It's all right," Edward replied, though his own heart pounded. He placed a hand on the door, speaking softly through the metal. "Easy now. We're almost there, girl." But it wasn't working. The horse began stamping, her hooves clattering against the floor, head rearing up in a blur of white blaze and chestnut hide. Pedestrians on the platform began to stare, some retreating, one woman pulling her child away as if Sovereign were a bomb about to go off. Edward could see the disaster in his mind, a champion horse injured in public, a viral video, the tabloids circling. Not now. Not like this. And then, a voice cut through the noise. "Let me help." He turned. A young woman, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her forehead, stood at his elbow. She wore a faded denim jacket, one sleeve torn, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Something in her eyes was both desperate and unwavering. Edward blinked. "Are you?" But she was already moving. "Give me your coat, quick. Horses don't spook as much if they can't see everything." He obeyed. She snatched the jacket and, to his shock, pressed herself sideways through the door as soon as it cracked open, blocking Sovereign's line of sight to the station. For a moment, chaos threatened. The horse snorted. The woman's shoulder knocked into a crate, but her movements were slow, deliberate, voice low and gentle. "You're all right, beauty," she murmured. "Just the rain and a bit too much noise. Breathe with me, yeah. That's it." The transformation was instant. Sovereign stilled, her breath coming in great shuddering bursts, but her eyes never left the girl's face. Edward found himself holding his own breath. The crowd faded. Even the PA seemed to quiet for a second. After several minutes, the horse's ears flicked forward in curiosity rather than terror. The groom sagged against the wall, eyes wide. Edward finally exhaled, feeling foolishly relieved. "Thank you," he said, voice almost lost in the clatter of a passing train. The young woman nodded, brushing wet hair back from her face. "You're lucky she likes a calm hand." Her accent was distinctly northern, Manchester, if he guessed right. Most horses panic when they smell fear. Edward studied her a moment. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but her face was older than her years, lines of fatigue etched beside her mouth. She had the unmistakable air of someone whose luck had just run out. He extended his hand. "Edward Harrington. I owe you a coffee, at least." "Clara," she replied, gripping his palm. "Yeah, coffee would be nice." They settled into a corner booth at the station cafe, Sovereign now safely loaded onto a horsebox waiting outside. Rain drummed on the awning overhead. Clara sipped her coffee slowly, as if rationing comfort. Edward noticed her duffel was stuffed with clothes, a book of poems poking out the side. "Traveling far?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nowhere to go, really. Lost my job at the bakery last week. Landlord gave me 2 days to clear out, so I'm just following the rails." Edward was silent. He glanced down at his hands, feeling an unfamiliar twinge, a blend of sympathy and opportunity. Clara caught his look, lips tightening. "Don't worry, I'm not asking for charity." "Neither am I," Edward replied. "Look, this is going to sound mad, but," he hesitated, searching her face for any sign he was overstepping. "I could use some help. Real, honest help. Someone who's not afraid of animals. And well, I need a companion, of sorts." Not for love. For respectability. There's pressure from the trust board to settle down. I'm in a very public role these days. If I had a partner, it'd quiet the critics, maybe give you a roof, a job, something stable. Clara stared at him. For a heartbeat, he worried she'd laugh, or worse, walk away. Instead, she looked down, tracing the rim of her mug. So, a marriage, but only on paper. You get your trust fund, I get a place to sleep? Edward's cheeks flushed. I suppose that's it. I know it's not romantic. Romantics never paid my rent, Clara interrupted. But, her jaw set, shoulders squaring. If I agree, I want boundaries. I want my own room, the right to walk away. No pretending for the neighbors. And I keep my name. He almost smiled. Deal. You'll have your independence, I promise. She lifted her coffee, finally meeting his gaze. All right then, Dr. Harrington. But if you ever lie to me, I'll be gone by dawn. Edward nodded, respect rising in his chest. Outside, the rain eased, and for the first time all day, Sovereign Blue let out a calm, contented whinny from her box, like a secret agreement had been made, not just between man and woman, but between all three lost souls searching for a new beginning. They married on a Wednesday morning beneath slate-gray clouds, the air thick with the promise of more rain. The chapel Edward chose was tucked down a winding lane on the outskirts of the city, almost hidden by old ash trees and blooming hydrangeas. Inside, the pews were empty except for Sir Alistair, Edward's oldest friend, and Jonathan, the family's lawyer, who agreed to witness the event with a kind of polite disbelief. The vicar, accustomed to joy and tears, seemed unsure what to make of the somber, businesslike exchange of vows. Clara wore a simple navy dress that she'd found at a thrift shop that morning. She had tied her hair back with a blue ribbon. Her hands didn't tremble as she signed the registry. Edward's suit was crisply pressed, but he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. There were no flowers, no music, just the quiet shuffle of papers and the soft whisper of the vicar's prayers. For a moment, Clara felt the weight of every decision that had led her to this point: job losses, the slow fading of old friendships, the hunger that gnawed at the belly when hope ran dry. She glanced sideways at Edward. He caught her gaze and gave a slight, reassuring nod. For both of them, this was not a beginning or an end, but a fragile truce with the world. As soon as the vows were complete, Jonathan handed Clara a small folder of documents, her new address, her legal name, the schedule of work and responsibilities at the trust. You'll want to keep these safe, he murmured. Things move quickly, around here. Outside, Sir Alistair, stoic and gray-haired, clapped Edward on the back. You're braver than you look, he teased. And Clara, he turned, his gaze softening. This place. It needs new blood, and so does the man. You'll do fine, I think. Clara smiled, unsure whether to feel grateful or burdened. They didn't linger. There was no celebration, no waiting limousine. A battered Land Rover waited by the curb, Sovereign Blue's transport trailer hitched behind it. The horse had been loaded with care and was restless, her tail flicking, her breath visible in the cold. Clara instinctively moved to check the latches and straps. Edward watched her, something close to relief flickering across his face. She spoke quietly to Sovereign, her fingers gentle as she patted the mare's neck. Easy, girl, Clara murmured. We're all going home. The drive to Oxfordshire was long and tense. Edward took the wheel, his knuckles white against the steering wheel as cityscape faded into fields and hedgerows. Clara sat beside him, her folder of documents pressed to her lap, watching raindrops race down the glass. Neither spoke for miles, the silence broken only by the low rumble of the engine and the occasional whinny from Sovereign Blue's trailer. At one point, Edward glanced sideways. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Clara shrugged. As all right as anyone can be, I suppose. This all feels like a strange dream, you know? He nodded, understanding. I promise you, I meant what I said about boundaries. Clara's lips curled in a small smile. And I meant what I said about walking away. Edward let out a nervous laugh, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. When they finally reached the estate, dusk was falling. The Harrington property was nothing like Clara had imagined. It was vast, yes, sprawling lawns, ancient oaks, and a main house that looked as though it had sprung from a painting. But there was an air of weariness to the place. Paint peeled from old shutters. Moss crept up stone steps. The gardens, once meticulously tended, were overgrown in spots. Yet there was beauty here, a kind of resilience. A stable hand opened the wrought iron gate and waved them through. Several staff members gathered at the barn, uncertain and curious, whispering as the new lady of the house stepped out of the Land Rover. Clara straightened her shoulders, refusing to shrink beneath their scrutiny. Sovereign Blue was the last to leave her trailer. Edward tried to coax her down, speaking softly, but the mare snorted and pulled away. Clara stepped forward, mindful of every eye on her. "Let me," she said simply. She approached Sovereign with a quiet, deliberate confidence, her movements slow. She spoke to the mare as if they were the only two souls alive in the gathering dusk. After a moment, Sovereign's ears flicked forward and she stepped onto the ramp, following Clara's gentle lead straight into her new stall. There was a quiet gasp from the stable hands. None had seen the mare truss so quickly. Inside the stable, the air was warm with the smell of hay and cedar shavings. Clara helped the staff settle Sovereign, checking the feed and water herself. The horse, usually wary of strangers, nuzzled her shoulder, calming as Clara murmured reassurances. Edward watched, amazement flickering in his eyes. "That's remarkable," he said under his breath. One of the younger stable hands, a girl named Elsie, grinned at Clara. "You've got the touch, miss. Most of us don't dare go near her." Clara shrugged. "Sometimes you just need to listen. Horses tell you everything if you're quiet enough to hear." News of the arrival spread quickly, not just among the staff, but across the countryside. The next morning, Clara awoke to a headline already making waves online. "Unknown girl marries Oxfordshire vet, lady or gold digger." There was a grainy photo of her at the stable, Sovereign Blue's head poking out beside her. The story ran in a dozen tabloids. Clara's phone, newly provided by Edward, buzzed nonstop with messages from reporters eager for a comment, old acquaintances demanding an explanation, and strangers offering everything from congratulations to thinly veiled threats. She sat on the edge of her new bed, the unfamiliar room both a refuge and a prison. Edward knocked on the door, newspaper in hand. His jaw was set, anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said. "I should have prepared you. This scrutiny comes with the territory. I never wanted to drag you into a circus." Clara took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with unexpected steadiness. "I'm not afraid of a little noise," she replied. "I've faced worse. Besides, I have Sovereign. She chose me, didn't she?" Edward's expression softened. "Yes. I think she did." That night, as rain pattered against the window, Clara crept down to the stables. She found Sovereign awake, ears pricked, sensing her approach. Clara leaned over the stall door, whispering secrets to the horse, feeling the comfort of soft breath on her hand. In that quiet, she realized that, for the first time in a long while, she had something worth holding on to. And so the first true bonds of her new life were forged, not in ceremony or paper, but in the trust of a frightened animal and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was where she was meant to be. Clara woke her first morning at Harrington Estate to a world muffled by fog. The great house stood silent, the windows catching the dawn like mirrors for a ghostly sun. She wandered the unfamiliar halls, footsteps echoing against tiled floors, trailing her hand along paneled walls that seemed to hum with stories she'd never been told. It was a house built to outlast generations, but it felt to Clara like a museum, every photograph and oil painting a monument to lives she'd never known. She found the kitchen empty, save for a note in Edward's sharp, precise handwriting. "Feed room, then breakfast at 7. "Welcome home," Clara smiled despite herself, warmed by the attempt at normalcy. She pulled on boots and shrugged into a rain jacket, the sleeves a bit too long. The grass outside glistened with dew, the sharp scents of earth and early spring biting the air. She walked the length of the gravel path, past a wild rose hedge and 2 stone dogs standing sentinel at the front steps. The barn was alive with quiet activity, Elsie the stable hand and an older man, Mr. Jenkins, already bustling through morning chores. Sovereign Blue's stall was nearest the door. The mare raised her head, snorting softly. Clara approached with an apple tucked in her palm, offering it slowly. Sovereign took the treat, lips gentle, eyes calm. The storm of her arrival already seemed to be receding, at least for now. "You two are a sight," Elsie remarked, sweeping out a stall nearby. She wouldn't eat from anyone else yesterday. Clara smiled, feeling a strange pride. Everyone needs someone to trust. As she worked alongside the staff, learning the routines, scooping feed, filling water buckets, sweeping the aisle, she felt eyes on her, curious, measuring. She was the outsider, the subject of gossip and rumor, but she refused to let herself shrink. She worked quietly, methodically, earning a few nods of approval by midday. Edward joined her for a late breakfast in the sunroom, a wall of windows looking out over tangled gardens and the distant paddocks. He seemed more at ease surrounded by his own world, but there was a tension in his jaw, an invisible weight on his shoulders. "I know this place isn't exactly welcoming," he said, breaking the silence. "My late wife, Annabelle, she ran the house like a ship. After she passed, things slowed down. The staff do what they must, but the spirit's gone. You'll find traces of her everywhere." Clara nodded, understanding all too well what it meant to haunt a house, or be haunted by one. "I'm not here to erase her," she said. "Just to find a place of my own." Edward looked at her, something softening in his eyes. "That's fair." After breakfast, Clara wandered the halls. She discovered a parlor filled with dusty books and pressed flowers, a music room with a covered grand piano, and, finally, the old tack room near the barn, a world unto itself. Saddles, bridles, ribbons, and faded photographs of horses and riders lined the walls. On a workbench sat a worn leather notebook, the edges frayed, pages stuffed with receipts, handwritten notes, and recipes in a looping feminine script. Curiosity drew Clara to the notebook. She flipped through pages of feed mixtures, poultices for swelling, herbal remedies, and in between, journal entries. Bits of longing, worry, pride. Edward's first win was sovereign. Annabelle's disappointment when the mare finished last in a muddy derby. Notes on every horse that had come and gone. The life of the estate recorded in fragments. She startled at the sound of boots behind her. Edward stood in the doorway, arms crossed. His face was unreadable. "I didn't mean to pry," Clara stammered, closing the book. He hesitated, tension flickering in his eyes. "It's all right. That room's been empty too long." Annabelle documented everything. She believed in keeping records, even if sometimes it felt like living in a ledger. Clara nodded, carefully replacing the notebook. "It feels like a living memory, almost. I get why it's hard." Edward studied her for a moment, then changed the subject. "I wanted to ask about Sovereign. She's always been sensitive, but with you she seems steadier. The board wants her to be the trust's ambassador. No more racing, just appearances and maybe therapy work, if she's willing." Clara considered. "She's been through a lot. She needs routine, calm, and someone she can count on. I'd like to care for her myself, if that's possible. Day-to-day stuff. Grooming, feeding, hand-walking. I want to learn her rhythm, and maybe find mine too." Edward's face relaxed, a rare smile ghosting across his lips. "I think she'd like that. And so would I." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Clara shadowed Elsie, learning every inch of the barn, the quirks of each horse. Sovereign remained her focus, and as the hours ticked by, the mare's anxious energy seemed to dissipate. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Every time Edward and Clara crossed paths, there was a stiffness, as if both were afraid to trespass on the other's pain. Late that evening, as storm clouds gathered again, a sudden commotion erupted in the barn. Sovereign's hooves struck the stall door in a nervous rhythm. Clara hurried to her, finding the mare wide-eyed, sides heaving. Behind her, Edward and Elsie appeared, concern written on their faces. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, voice low. Edward watched the horse, then shook his head. "She does this when people fight. She picks up every tension in the room. The last time, it was right before Annabelle." He stopped, swallowing hard. Clara reached into the stall, stroking Sovereign's neck. "It's all right. No one's fighting now. We're just figuring things out." Slowly, the horse calmed, her breath evening out. Clara glanced at Edward, finding him watching her, not with suspicion, but with gratitude. That night, Clara sat in her small room, the day's weight pressing in. She realized she'd landed in the middle of other people's memories, a life that needed more than patching. Yet, as she fell asleep to the distant sound of horses, she found a strange comfort in the uncertainty. She would earn her place here, step by step, one gentle touch at a time. For the first time in months, she dared to hope that she wasn't just passing through. Maybe, with enough patience and care, she could lay down roots of her own. It was late, the kind of late when the house's ancient beams groaned softly and even the restless wind outside seemed to hush its voice. Clara made her way down the long stone corridor, guided by a faint strip of golden light spilling from the barn. Edward had mentioned that he sometimes worked late, finding it easier to breathe among horses than in the heavy quiet of the manor. Tonight, something had pulled her from her restless half-sleep, maybe the echo of Sovereign Blue's hooves, or maybe just a feeling that there were words left unsaid. Inside, the stable glowed with warmth, lanterns flickering along the rafters. The scent of hay, leather, and sweet feed mingled in the air, soothing the nerves that had kept Clara awake. Edward stood by Sovereign's stall, gently brushing the mare's gleaming coat. For a long moment, he didn't look up, absorbed in the repetitive, calming motion. Clara paused at the door, uncertain whether to intrude. But Sovereign saw her first, lifting her head with a quiet nicker. Edward glanced over his shoulder. "Can't sleep." Clara shrugged, folding her arms. "Seems I'm not the only one." He smiled, just a flicker of warmth that made him seem years younger. "Old habit. Horses have always been easier than people." She stepped closer, her boots making soft thuds on the straw. The barn was peaceful, a world away from the whispers and judgment of the estate. Clara rested her arms on the stall door, watching Sovereign's big eyes blink lazily. Edward broke the silence first, his voice low. "I haven't said much about Annabelle, have I?" Clara shook her head. "No. But you don't have to. I'm not here to replace her, Edward. I just want to find my own way." He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "When Annabelle died, I stopped caring about most things. Friends faded. The house. Just a place to sleep. I threw myself into the trust, the horses. But at night, there's always a kind of emptiness that nothing seems to fill." Clara leaned her forehead against the stall, understanding more than she could say. "It's strange, isn't it? How you can lose yourself by trying to keep busy. After my dad passed, I did everything to fill the days, jobs, friends, noise. But you can't outrun it. Not really." The truth hung between them, gentle and raw. Edward set the brush aside, turning to face her fully. "Did you love him? The man your family wanted you to marry?" Clara shook her head, letting her hair fall forward to hide her eyes. "I was. Convenient. He was older, had money. My mother thought he'd solve everything. I ran the night before the wedding. Slept at a bus stop, then caught a train to Manchester. I've been running ever since." Edward's voice was barely a whisper. "You don't have to run here." She looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of pretense. Instead, she found only a tired honesty, a man making no promises, but offering her the space to breathe. There in the golden barn light, it seemed natural to let down their guard. They talked quietly for over an hour, about the old house and its shadows, about Sovereign's quirks, about what it meant to be adrift in a world that demanded roots. Clara confessed her doubts and hopes, her longing to belong somewhere, even if just for a season. Edward listened, then surprised her. "Let's try for more than a paper marriage," he said. "Not romance. Not obligation. Just honesty. We see what happens if we let ourselves actually care, even just as friends." Clara's first instinct was to recoil, to retreat behind old walls. But Sovereign, standing close by, reached her head over the stall and nuzzled Clara's arm. The warmth of the horse's breath felt like permission to try. "All right," Clara said softly. "But only if we keep talking, truth, no matter how ugly." Edward nodded, an unspoken pact settling between them. From that night forward, Clara took charge of Sovereign's daily care. She learned to mix feeds, measure supplements, brush out the mare's sensitive coat, and muck the stalls before sunrise. The routine grounded her, brought the hours into focus. Under her gentle hand, Sovereign's nerves eased. She would follow Clara through the paddock, responding to voice and touch with a confidence no one had seen since her racing days. Elsie watched in wonder as Clara worked. "It's like she's a different horse," she marveled one morning as Sovereign let Clara slip a halter over her ears without so much as a flick of the tail. Clara smiled. Maybe she just needed someone new to believe in her. Edward began inviting Clara to join meetings for the trust. At first, the board, mostly older men and women, regarded her with polite skepticism. But Clara's observations about Sovereign's needs and her careful record-keeping earned her respect. When Edward announced that he wanted Clara to help manage the welfare fund for retired racehorses, there was barely a murmur of protest. "She's got more sense than half the committee," Sir Alistair declared, not unkindly. But not everyone was happy about the new order of things. Gossip flared in nearby villages. Some called Clara the runaway bride. Others whispered about Edward's motives, about whether the estate could survive another scandal. The more she worked, the more she felt the eyes on her, measuring, waiting for her to stumble. Yet every night, in the quiet of the barn, Clara found herself growing stronger. Each brushstroke, each soft word spoken to Sovereign, was a step away from the person she had been and towards someone steadier, braver. She no longer felt like a guest in her own life. One evening, as she sat in the tack room, recording the day's feedings in Annabelle's old notebook, Edward joined her. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside her on the wooden bench. After a while, he cleared his throat. "You know, Sovereign's not the only one who's starting to trust again." Clara closed the book, heart fluttering in her chest. "Maybe we both just needed a little patience." In the stable's golden light, among the scent of hay and horses, two people and one remarkable mare began to find something neither had expected: the slow, honest growth of trust, a foundation that, for the first time, felt like it just might hold. The peace that Clara had begun to carve out for herself at the estate was short-lived. Spring's promise was in the air, with bright daffodils nodding along the garden borders and soft mist curling off the fields at dawn. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the world might be healing. Sovereign Blue's nerves continued to ease, the staff had stopped whispering when Clara entered a room, and even Edward seemed more relaxed, smiling more often, walking the estate with the quiet pride of a man rediscovering his purpose. But the countryside had its own way of letting you know when something, or someone, was about to disrupt the calm. It started with the arrival of a gleaming black Bentley that glided through the front gates one Friday morning. The car looked almost out of place against the muddy gravel and old stone walls, its polished chrome winking in the pale sunlight. From the back seat stepped Lady Victoria Wyndham, clad in a tailored cream coat and dark glasses, her posture rigid, her gaze as cold and sharp as the wind that swept in behind her. She was accompanied by her assistant, a thin young man who never seemed to look up from his tablet. Edward greeted her at the door, every line in his body tense. Clara watched from the stable, hands deep in a bucket of feed, heart thumping with the dread of someone who had never felt welcome in the presence of money and power. Lady Victoria did not bother with pleasantries. "Edward, darling, we need to talk about the future of Harrington Estate," she said, her voice clipped, the kind that could freeze a river. "You can't possibly be thinking of squandering this land on sentimental charity. Resorts are booming, you know. A spa, a golf course, think of the value. And your so-called wife, where did you even find her? A charity auction?" Edward's jaw clenched. "Clara is my wife. And the estate will remain focused on the preservation and welfare of our thoroughbreds. That's final." Lady Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Final? Oh, Edward, nothing is ever truly final, not in this world." She swept past him into the foyer, heels clicking on the flagstones, as if she owned the very ground she walked on. Clara kept her distance, but her stomach twisted. She'd heard stories about Lady Victoria, the heiress who bought up old family estates like trinkets, flipping them into luxury properties or exclusive clubs. It was said that nothing stood in her way, not tradition, not law, not even the lives already entangled in the land she wanted. As the day wore on, Victoria made her presence known. She toured the stables, wrinkling her nose at the scent of horses and hay, critiquing everything from the feed to the fencing. She asked pointed questions about the estate's finances in a tone that suggested she already knew the answers. Her assistant snapped photos, tapped on his tablet, whispered in her ear. When Victoria saw Clara in the barn, brushing Sovereign Blue's coat, she paused and appraised her the way a judge might regard a defendant. "So you're the famous Mrs. Harrington," she said coolly. "You must know that horses this sensitive are a liability. One wrong incident, and your little charity will be on the front page for all the wrong reasons." Clara didn't flinch. "She's not a liability. She's the reason this trust matters. Horses like Sovereign deserve peace after everything they've given." Victoria laughed, a sound brittle as glass. "We'll see, dear. We'll see." That afternoon, as Clara mucked out the stalls, she caught two stable hands whispering behind the tack room. She heard her name, followed by the words gold digger and lucky break. The tabloids had been digging into her past, old social media posts, distant relatives, rumors about her running away from a failed engagement. Headlines appeared online and in the local shop. "Unknown girl snags Oxfordshire heiress. Is she after the money or the mare?" The press began circling. Clara found herself photographed every time she stepped onto the lane. One morning, a drone buzzed low over the paddocks, its camera glinting. Sovereign Blue panicked at the whirring noise, rearing and striking at her stall door. It took all of Clara's strength and a steady, low voice to calm her. Her hands shook for hours afterward. Edward was furious but kept it tightly controlled. He met with his lawyer, demanded the press respect private property, but the damage was done. The staff grew wary. People in the village started whispering again, and Clara felt their eyes on her everywhere she went. One evening, as a storm built on the horizon, Edward found Clara sitting alone in the barn, Sovereign's head resting heavily in her lap. The mare's breath was warm against her fingers, her flanks still quivering from the day's scare. "It's my fault," Clara whispered, voice thick with exhaustion. "If I weren't here, if I hadn't married you." Edward knelt beside her, shaking his head. "No. This is what Victoria wants, to isolate you, to make you doubt yourself. She'll use every trick in the book. But you have something she'll never have. Sovereign trusts you. And so do I." The wind picked up, rattling the doors, making the old barn creak. Sovereign stirred, ears flicking, then settled as Clara ran her hand down the mare's neck. In that moment, she realized just how closely the horse mirrored their emotions. When Clara's heart was calm, so was Sovereign's. A few days later, Victoria's campaign escalated. Her assistant filed complaints about the safety of the estate's fencing and the erratic behavior of the horses, especially Sovereign. Anonymous calls were made to local authorities. An inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, poking around the paddocks, scribbling notes. Edward did his best to remain composed. He answered every question, showed the records, explained the care routines. But Victoria's aim was clear: prove the estate was unsafe, trigger a forced sale, and sweep in to claim the land for her development plans. That night, after the inspector left, Clara sat beside Sovereign, watching the mare nibble her hay. The fight was just beginning, but she saw a glimmer of hope in the way Sovereign pressed close, trusting her even as the world closed in. Edward stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the last golden light of day. "We'll fight this," he said, voice steady, "together." And for the first time since Lady Victoria's arrival, Clara believed they just might. The days after the inspector's visit blurred together for Clara, a haze of unease clinging to everything she did. Though the estate seemed outwardly unchanged, every footstep on the gravel paths now sounded sharper, every glance from a staff member seemed heavier with doubt. She tried to bury herself in routine, early mornings in the barn, walking Sovereign Blue through the dew-wet paddocks, scribbling notes for the trust fund with Edward in the study, but the tension was always there, simmering just below the surface. It was during one of these gray mornings that Clara found herself drawn once more to the old tack room. She meant only to check inventory for upcoming visitors, but something compelled her toward the battered leather notebook Annabelle had kept, the one she'd found tucked behind a pile of faded rosettes weeks earlier. This time, with no one around, Clara let herself read deeper. Between pages of feed recipes and farrier notes, she found a bundle of old letters, carefully folded, the paper worn soft by time. Annabelle's handwriting spilled across the pages, sometimes sharp, sometimes looping and desperate. Clara read in silence, piecing together a marriage far more complicated than she'd imagined. Annabelle wrote of loneliness, of feeling invisible in a life lived for horses and legacy, of the pressure to keep up appearances. There were hints of fights, apologies, and brief, fragile truces. In one letter, Annabelle confessed that even the estate's beauty could not heal the ache of being misunderstood. Clara closed the notebook, eyes stinging. For the first time, she felt a kinship with the woman whose memory haunted every corner of the house. "We're both outsiders in our own ways," she whispered, glancing at Sovereign Blue grazing in the paddock beyond the window. Maybe that's why she kept so many secrets. Later that week, as spring sunlight broke through the clouds, the estate prepared for its biggest event since Clara's arrival, an open day to raise funds for retired racehorses. Posters went up in village shop windows. The staff swept barns, polished bridles, and filled every bucket with fresh water. Edward insisted they open the grounds to the public, hoping to counteract the negative press Lady Victoria's campaign had stirred up. Clara, nervous but determined, spent hours organizing, arranging hay bales into makeshift seating, planning guided tours of the paddocks, writing little cards with each horse's story. She made sure Sovereign's stall was immaculate and decorated the entrance with wildflowers from the garden. The morning of the event dawned bright and blue. Cars lined the long driveway. Families and horse lovers trickled in, greeted by the scent of fresh grass and the soft, hopeful hum of possibility. Clara stood near the barn entrance, her nerves masked by a practiced smile, as Edward welcomed guests with a steady handshake. At first, everything ran smoothly. Children fed ponies carrots. Volunteers explained the trust's mission. Edward gave a speech about the importance of welfare for retired racehorses, his voice strong and clear. For the first time in weeks, Clara saw pride return to his posture. But trouble, as ever, was close behind. Clara noticed a dark sedan parked at the far end of the drive, unfamiliar, its driver lingering, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. A man with a camera slung around his neck wandered too close to the paddock fences. A group of teenagers giggled and filmed on their phones, as if hoping for a viral moment. It was nothing at first, just a background hum. But as she led a group past Sovereign's paddock, a sudden, sharp sound split the air, a car horn, blaring and aggressive, from the sedan at the gate. Sovereign Blue reacted instantly. The mare jerked her head high, eyes wide with terror. She bolted, crashing against the fence, hooves scraping at the ground. The crowd gasped, some children crying out in fear. Phone shot up, recording. Clara's heart pounded as she forced her way through the startled onlookers. She moved on instinct. "Clear a path!" she called, her voice ringing out. "No sudden movements, give her room." Ignoring the stares and the phones, Clara vaulted the fence and approached Sovereign with slow, deliberate steps. The mare trembled, white foam at her lips, her wild eyes searching for safety. Clara reached out, palms open, her voice steady and low. "Easy, girl. I'm here. Nothing's going to hurt you now." She let the silence stretch between them, crowd forgotten. Sovereign's ears twitched, then slowly flicked toward Clara. Inch by inch, the horse lowered her head, letting Clara slip the halter over her neck. "That's it. We're okay," she murmured, walking Sovereign back to the barn, the crowd parting in awe. By the time they reached the stable, a hush had fallen over the yard. Clara stroked Sovereign's mane, whispering comfort. Edward hurried to her side, relief etched across his face. "You saved her, Clara. And you saved us all a scandal." But the day wasn't quite done. As Clara led Sovereign to her stall, Elsie ran up, face flushed. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. She thrust her phone into Clara's hand, a video, shaky but clear, showing a man in a dark jacket ducking around the fence line before the horn sounded. Another angle showed him speaking with the sedan's driver, then slipping away as Sovereign bolted. Edward's expression darkened. "That's one of Victoria's men." She tried to create chaos, right here in front of everyone. The video spread quickly, first among the visitors, then across social media. Instead of a scandal, the story shifted. Brave young woman calms racing legend as saboteurs strike at charity event. Support poured in from the community. Messages of thanks, and of outrage at the attempted sabotage, began filling the trust's inbox. That evening, as the last car pulled away and the barn lights glowed softly in the dusk, Edward and Clara sat together outside Sovereign's stall. The day had been a test, but they had passed, not with force or anger, but with calm and resolve. Clara felt the weight of Annabelle's letters in her pocket, a reminder that every life at the estate was shaped by hardship and choice, by the courage to keep going. Edward placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "Whatever Victoria tries next, she'll find we don't scare easy." Clara smiled, feeling Sovereign nuzzle her arm. For the first time, she felt she truly belonged, not because she'd married into the estate, but because she'd earned her place, step by trembling step. The afterglow of the successful open day didn't last long. If anything, it seemed to fuel Lady Victoria's determination. By midweek, Edward received a stack of ominous letters, first from tabloid journalists, then from solicitors, each stamped with heavy insignias that signaled trouble. Clara could feel the tension rise in the air, an invisible current that swept through the halls and left staff whispering behind closed doors. One gray morning, as a light rain drummed against the kitchen window, Jonathan the lawyer arrived early and unannounced, clutching a thick leather satchel. Clara made coffee, her hands trembling, and set out 3 mugs. Jonathan didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a stack of documents across the table. "They're coming for you, Clara. Victoria's lawyers are alleging you embezzled funds from a former employer. Total fabrication, of course, but the tabloids are already printing it. They're painting you as a career fraud who set her sights on Edward's fortune the day she arrived." Clara stared at the documents, the words swimming before her eyes. "I never took anything. I was barely making enough to pay rent. I left because they made me feel like I was nothing." Edward's face was pale with fury, but he placed his hand gently over hers. "We know. But the court of public opinion moves faster than the real thing. We have to get ahead of it." As if the allegations weren't enough, that afternoon brought a second blow. One of the stable staff, arms full of paperwork, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Dr. Harrington, there's a problem with Sovereign's passport. The inspector from the open day flagged something odd." Edward took the file, flipping through. His frown deepened. This is impossible. The vaccine records, dates don't match. The stamps are all wrong. She's listed as receiving a banned substance last year, except she was in full, not racing, and I did her veterinary checks myself." Jonathan leaned in, examining the papers. "This is more than a clerical error. Someone's tampered with her passport, her official veterinary records. Clara's mind spun. Victoria. She said the horse was a liability, that one wrong move would ruin us. If she could prove Sovereign's been drugged, she could get the trust shut down, claim we're unfit to care for the horses. Edward nodded grimly. She's fabricating evidence. If these records go unchallenged, the authorities could seize Sovereign, maybe all the horses, and revoke our license. It's a legal trap, and a PR nightmare. Jonathan rolled up his sleeves. Let me compare the stamps to the ones from last season. They have serial numbers, harder to fake than the signature. I'll need Sovereign's old files from storage, the lot numbers on every vaccine, and any emails from suppliers. The kitchen became a war room, papers spread everywhere, the scent of coffee mixing with the sharp tang of anxiety. Clara called up old managers, tracked down emails, and scrolled through months of digital receipts. Elsie and Jenkins scoured the tack room for Annabelle's old record book, desperate for anything that would prove Sovereign's records had been altered. Edward fielded calls from reporters and animal welfare officials. We have nothing to hide. I can account for every injection, every supplement. This is an attack, plain and simple. But the worst moment came when a local police officer, accompanied by an official-looking man in a dark suit, arrived at the estate. We're here to serve notice of an official investigation, the man said, reading from a document. Allegations of animal welfare violations, fraudulent veterinary documentation, and financial impropriety. Clara stood in the doorway, feeling the floor tilt beneath her. Edward squared his shoulders. We'll cooperate fully. But you're not taking Sovereign off this property without a court order. The men left after searching the barn, their faces impassive. The threat, however, hung over the estate like a gathering thunderhead. That night, Clara found herself alone in the barn, Sovereign's breath warm on her cheek. I'm so sorry, girl. This isn't what I wanted for you. Sovereign nuzzled her gently, as if sensing the burden pressing on Clara's heart. Back in the house, Jonathan finally called the two of them into the study. I found it, he announced, holding up 2 sample vaccine labels and the fake veterinary stamp. Look here, this is the mark from your old supplier. But on the new documents, the batch number is for a flu shot only imported last month. The stamp is a copy of one the company stopped using last year. It's a forgery, clever, but not clever enough. Edward's relief was palpable, but his anger burned brighter. We can prove it's all faked. This is Victoria's doing, no doubt about it. We'll fight back. And we'll take this public, no more hiding. Clara felt hope flicker through her exhaustion. For the first time, the tables had turned. But the battle wasn't over. She knew Victoria wouldn't give up so easily. The next day, a letter arrived at the gate, unsigned, but written in a sharp, feminine hand. You should know when you're beaten. Leave now and spare yourself further humiliation. Clara tore it in half without a word. She'd been running her whole life, from pain, from shame, from the feeling that she didn't belong. But now, with Sovereign at her side and Edward fighting for her, she felt something new rise inside her. Resolve. Later, as Edward addressed the trust board, he stood with Clara at his side. We are under attack, he said. But we will not be bullied. Clara has done nothing wrong. The welfare of our horses is our only concern, and anyone who wishes to see proof may inspect our records at any time. The meeting ended with a murmur of support, Sir Alister's hand gripping Clara's shoulder. Don't let them break you, lass. You're stronger than you know. That night, Clara stood in the paddock with Sovereign Blue, staring out over the moonlit fields. She felt the scars of every fight that had come before, but she also felt something else, connection, purpose, and the unspoken promise that, this time, she would see the fight through. Inside, Edward joined her, slipping an arm gently around her shoulders. For the first time, neither needed to say anything. The storm had not passed, but together, they could face it, whatever came next. Sleep came in fitful snatches for everyone on the estate as the investigation dragged on. Clara felt the pressure mounting in every part of her body, her muscles wound tight, her thoughts chasing themselves in endless anxious loops. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every flicker of headlights near the property at night made her heart pound with dread. The staff did their best to keep routine steady, but even Sovereign Blue, usually the estate's emotional barometer, was restless, ears flicking at every sudden sound, pacing the paddock as if she too sensed danger was close. One evening, Clara was finishing chores in the barn just as a hard wind picked up, whistling through cracks in the old wood. She double-checked every latch and window, then lingered in Sovereign's stall longer than usual, letting the gentle rhythm of the horses breathing steady her nerves. Edward came by to say goodnight, pausing in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm, yellow light. "We're almost through this," he told her, though his voice betrayed the weight he was carrying. "You should try to sleep." "I'll come in soon," Clara promised, stroking Sovereign's velvet nose. "I just want to make sure everyone's settled." The estate felt unusually still as she walked back toward the main house, moonlight silvering the lawns, the night so quiet she could hear the distant hoot of an owl. Clara paused, letting the calm seep in, trying to imagine life after all of this, after the investigations, the lawyers, the lies. She pictured quiet dinners with Edward, summer days spent in the fields with Sovereign, laughter echoing through the old halls. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. A sudden shout shattered the silence. Then another. Clara spun, heart in her throat, as she saw a strange orange glow at the edge of the property, near the hay barn. Her mind snapped to attention. Fire! She sprinted, legs flying, breath tearing in her chest as she cleared the yard. Flames licked the night sky, hungrily devouring the dry hay and wooden beams. Sparks showered across the grass. For a split second, Clara froze, panic screaming at her to turn back. But then she saw Sovereign's silhouette, eyes wild in the light, trapped by the heat and smoke in the adjacent stable. Clara didn't think, she ran straight for the barn, coughing as smoke burned her lungs. She grabbed the lead rope, shouting Sovereign's name, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Come on, girl, this way." The mare stamped and reared, terrified. Clara ducked low, dodging falling embers, and made her way to the stall door. Her hands fumbled with the latch, fingers slick with sweat, but somehow she got it open. Sovereign bolted past her, out into the smoky night. Clara followed, tripping and sprawling in the dirt, but not caring, she scrambled up, guiding the mare away from the chaos. At the same time, lights flicked on in the main house and cottages. Edward, Sir Alister, Jenkins, and half the village poured onto the scene with buckets, hoses, shovels, anything to fight the flames. The next hour blurred into chaos, water spraying, shouts echoing, heat so fierce Clara thought her skin would blister. Edward barked orders, his voice cutting through the roar. Neighbors formed a human chain, passing buckets hand to hand. Someone called the fire brigade, and sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second. Clara clung to Sovereign, who was trembling violently but alive. When the worst of the fire had been beaten back and the barn was reduced to smoldering ruins, Clara found herself sitting in the grass, arms wrapped around Sovereign's neck, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Edward came to her side, dropping to his knees, pulling her into a fierce embrace. She felt him shaking, whether from fear or relief she couldn't tell. "You saved her," he whispered, voice thick. "You saved her and yourself." Clara could barely speak. "I thought I'd lose her. Or you. I was so scared." Neighbors brought blankets and water, gathering around the survivors in a huddle of shock and sympathy. Sir Alister, covered in soot, sat down heavily beside them. "That was no accident. Someone set that blaze. I saw a car speeding away as we came running." Jenkins nodded grimly. "We'll check the cameras. There's a new one behind the west field. Maybe it caught something." The fire brigade arrived, dousing the last embers and taking statements. As dawn crept over the fields, Clara, Edward, and a few others gathered in the kitchen, nursing mugs of hot tea. Everyone's faces were drawn and pale, but there was a feeling in the air, a new solidarity, as if the night's terror had fused them into something stronger than mere colleagues. Later that morning, Jenkins returned with a USB drive in hand. "You'll want to see this." He plugged it into the old laptop on the kitchen table. The screen flickered, and there, caught by the grainy camera, was a shadowy figure hurling something into the hay barn. A moment later, the flames erupted. The figure turned, sprinting to a car parked just out of range, but not before the camera caught the license plate. Jonathan squinted at the screen. That car was rented 3 days ago, under the name of Victoria's assistant. "It's all here." Relief ward with exhaustion. "This is what we need," Edward said, barely above a whisper. "Now we can prove in court that this wasn't an accident, this was sabotage." Clara looked around at the people gathered, her unlikely family, forged in fire and chaos, and made a silent vow. "We protect each other now. No more running. No more hiding." That afternoon, as Sovereign rested in her stall, eyes bright but exhausted, Clara stayed with her, stroking her mane, whispering promises she wasn't sure how to keep. "You're safe now," she murmured. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Edward joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We're still standing," he said, his voice steady. And we're going to fight. Whatever it takes. The scars of that night would not fade quickly, but as the sun broke through the smoky haze, Clara knew something had changed. The estate was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place worth defending, a place where she finally belonged. London was soaked in an early summer rain as Edward and Clara walked up the wide steps of the courthouse, hand in hand, with Jonathan and Sir Alister close behind. Clara wore a simple navy dress, hair pinned back, the evidence files pressed tightly to her chest. Edward's face was grave but determined, his arm steadying her against the flashbulbs and the low hum of reporters' questions. The week since the fire had passed in a blur of fear, hope, and restless determination. News of the attempted arson had swept through Oxfordshire, drawing neighbors and supporters to the estate side. Even the tabloids, quick to feast on rumors, began to shift their tone as evidence emerged. The grainy security footage, the records from the car rental agency, the digital trail left by Victoria's assistant, all of it painted a damning picture. But as Clara well knew, the truth was rarely enough on its own. It had to be fought for, step by painful step. Inside the grand, echoing halls, the hearing room buzzed with tension. Lady Victoria Wyndham sat at the far table, surrounded by her legal team. She was every inch the society matron, immaculate hair, diamond brooch glinting, eyes as sharp as broken glass. But there was a brittleness in her posture, a flicker of unease as Jonathan set up their evidence. The judge entered. Proceedings began. The prosecution laid out the accusations: animal endangerment, fraudulent documentation, attempted forced sale, and, at last, arson. Victoria's lawyers countered with venom, painting the Harrington Trust as reckless, unprofessional, and corrupt. For hours, words volleyed back and forth, evidence and innuendo tangled together. Clara sat beside Edward, hands clenched in her lap, listening as her name was dragged through the mud once again. But this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. Edward's presence was like a shield, Jonathan's sharp wit countering every legal trap, and Sir Alister's steely gaze daring anyone to challenge their honesty. When it was time, Jonathan presented their evidence. He spoke clearly, holding up the original vaccine receipts, the real veterinary stamps, and the carefully labeled batches. He showed how Victoria's team had used discontinued stamps and fake batch numbers, pointing to side-by-side comparisons. The judge listened intently, nodding as Jonathan methodically dismantled the allegations of doping and falsified records. Then came the security footage. The grainy video flickered to life on the screen, showing the shadowy figure hurling the incendiary into the hay barn, then dashing away. The license plate was clear, matched to Victoria's assistant. The crowd in the gallery murmured, reporters scribbling furiously. Victoria's lawyer objected, grasping for any technicality, but the judge silenced him with a glance. The evidence is clear. This was no accident. The estate was targeted deliberately, with intent to harm both the animals and the people who care for them. The turning point came when Clara was called to speak. She stood, voice trembling at first, but steadied herself with a deep breath. "I came to Harrington Estate with nothing," she began, "except a love for horses and a willingness to work. I've been called a fraud, a thief, and worse. But everything I have done here has been for the welfare of Sovereign Blue and the other horses who call this place home. I ask only that we be allowed to protect them, free from the games of people who see them as pawns in a business deal." She finished, and a hush fell over the room. Even Lady Victoria looked away. Reporters crowded the corridor during the recess, bombarding Edward and Clara with questions. Sir Alister intervened, his voice carrying authority. "The Harrington Estate has always stood for honor and care, for horses and people alike. That will not change." When the hearing resumed, the judge delivered the ruling. Lady Victoria and her associates were to be investigated for fraud, conspiracy, and criminal endangerment. She was ordered to have no further contact with the estate or its staff. The judge further instructed the authorities to review Victoria's network of shell companies, each, it now seemed, a thread in a web of illicit land grabs and shady dealings. The courtroom erupted with a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and whispered applause. Clara felt the weight begin to lift from her shoulders. Edward squeezed her hand. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train at Paddington, she truly believed in a future beyond mere survival. Afterward, as they walked into the rain-soaked street, the press swarmed them. This time, though, the questions were different. How does it feel to be vindicated? Will you continue the trust's work? What's next for Sovereign Blue? Clara looked at Edward, sharing a private smile. "We're going home," she said simply. "The horses are waiting." That night, back at the estate, the celebration was quiet but joyous. Neighbors arrived with pies and cakes, staff uncorked bottles of cider, and even Sovereign Blue seemed to dance in her paddock, tail flying in the twilight. Jonathan gave a rare toast, eyes suspiciously bright. "To courage," he said, raising his glass. "To the truth. And to family, however it's made." Clara found herself drawn outside, the cool air sharp and cleansing. She stood by the fence, watching Sovereign graze, the mare's silhouette strong against the moonlit grass. Edward joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "We did it," he murmured, voice choked with relief. "You did it." Clara shook her head. "We did it. All of us. Even Sovereign. Especially Sovereign." Inside the house, laughter echoed, the old walls ringing with something that felt like hope. Sir Alister settled by the fire, Elsie and Jenkins played cards, and the staff gathered, no longer divided by suspicion or fear. For the first time in her life, Clara felt rooted, anchored not by obligation or survival, but by belonging. The fight wasn't over, there would be more battles, more storms, but she was ready. She had found her place. She had found her family. And as the night stretched peacefully around them, the estate seemed to breathe a long, grateful sigh, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 1 year later, Oxfordshire was deep in the green-gold heart of summer. Sunlight slanted over rolling pastures, buttercups and wild poppies tangled among the tall grass, and the old Harrington Estate had never looked more alive. The house, once a place of old memories and whispered doubts, now rang with new laughter, the windows always open to the scent of hay and warm earth. The annual village fair brought together everyone from the smallest children to the oldest neighbors. This year, the trust was front and center, an open house, horse demonstrations, music, and a bake sale under bunting that fluttered in the breeze. The estate grounds buzzed with joy and a sense of belonging Clara had once only dreamed about. Sovereign Blue, fully recovered and calm as the summer breeze, was now the trust's pride and joy, a living legend and gentle spirit. She had found a new purpose, working with children who struggled with anxiety, fear, or the lingering shadows of trauma. For these kids, Sovereign was more than a horse. She was a silent friend, her calm presence coaxing out tentative smiles and quiet courage. Clara loved to watch them, tiny hands brushing Sovereign's shining coat, children's laughter ringing as they walked together around the paddock, each step a triumph over invisible battles. Edward, as always, moved among the crowds, his veterinarian's jacket exchanged for rolled-up sleeves and a broad, easy smile. Where once he had been haunted, he now seemed lit from within. He took endless questions from visitors, explained the trust's new rescue programs, and told the story of how Sovereign Blue had been saved, how community had triumphed over greed. Clara stood by the barn doors, clipboard in hand, organizing volunteers for the Meet the Horses tours. Amelia Rose, the estate's first rescued foal, pranced at her side, tugging gently at Clara's skirt, always eager for attention. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance, children, parents, horses, laughter. Even Lady Victoria was occasionally mentioned, but now only as a lesson, a cautionary tale whispered by adults over cider and pie. A reporter from the Oxfordshire Gazette approached Clara in the late afternoon, camera slung around her neck. "You must be Mrs. Harrington. May I take a photo of you and Sovereign? The paper wants a story about hope and happy endings." Clara hesitated, still shy of the limelight, but Sovereign nudged her gently, as if to say, "This is our story now." So Clara smiled, letting the sunlight catch her hair, and posed with Sovereign and Amelia Rose beside the barn. The camera clicked, capturing not just a picture, but a moment. 3 lives, battered and mended, now shining together. As the sun set, Edward gathered everyone for a group photo under the great oak tree. Staff and neighbors, children and horses, even Jonathan and Sir Alister, who finally allowed himself a crooked grin, stood together, arms around each other, a living tapestry of survival and second chances. After the last of the crowds had trickled home, Clara found herself wandering through the empty stables, Sovereign trailing close behind. The soft golden light lingered, painting the dust motes like fireflies. She paused at Sovereign's stall, resting her forehead against the mare's neck, listening to the steady, peaceful sound of breathing. "We made it, girl," Clara whispered. "We really made it." Edward joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. In the quiet, he pressed a folded letter into her hand. "Came in today's post. No return address." Curious, Clara unfolded the paper. The handwriting was careful, elegant, but unfamiliar. "You taught me that courage is sometimes a kind of gentleness. I believed lies, once, about you, about the trust. I was wrong. Please never stop doing what you do. Our world needs people like you and horses like her. Thank you. Clara's eyes filled, but she smiled, pressing the letter to her heart. She didn't know who had sent it, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone who doubted her from afar, but it felt like a full circle, the world's quiet way of saying, you belong. That night, the family, Edward, Clara, Sir Alistair, Elsie, Jenkins, Jonathan, and all the others, gathered for a simple supper beneath the stars. Plates of food passed from hand to hand, laughter echoing in the warm summer air. Someone played a battered guitar, a few voices lifted in song, and even Sovereign seemed to sway in time, content. Edward rose to give a toast. A year ago, I thought this place would become another casualty of greed. But you all proved me wrong. Together, we built something better, a family, a sanctuary, and a future for every horse who needs a home. To the trust and to the courage it takes to keep going, even when the world tries to break you. Glasses clinked, candles flickered, and Clara felt tears sting her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. The ghosts of the past had not vanished, but they had found their place in the story, woven among new memories. Sovereign Blue would live out her days not as a trophy, but as a teacher, a friend, and a symbol of what could happen when people stood together. The Sovereign Blue Fund was announced that night, seeded by a gift from a grateful donor, with the goal of rescuing and caring for retired horses across the country. Clara and Edward, side by side, would run it together. The lessons of the past year were simple, but hard-won. That home is something you fight for, that family is sometimes chosen, and that courage is as gentle as an outstretched hand to a frightened horse. Before bed, Clara wrote her own note, tucked into the ledger where Annabelle's recipes and memories still lingered. We are not the same as when we arrived. But together, we are stronger. Thank you for every lesson, both the hard and the gentle. She set down her pen and stepped out beneath the stars, Edward's hand finding hers, Sovereign Blue following close behind. The estate was quiet now, but full, alive with the promise of tomorrow and the knowledge that, whatever storms might come, they would face them together.